Now these are probably identical, but I've been caught recently with a minor variation, so I'm just checking closely to make sure that that's the case. Because if they're identical, I'm only going to show you the servicing of one of these rangefinders. Right, we'll start with this one, which is the one from the later camera. And these rangefinders appear to be absolutely identical to me. So, taking this apart for cleaning. Well, I think I've mentioned previously there's about 20 glass air surfaces with these rangefinders, so, or the viewfinder system as a whole, so they do gather up a bit of grime. I'll start by removing the eyepiece lens. And the prism at the end. Now the prism, there's two screws here on the aluminium body. They do two jobs. They hold this prism assembly in place and they adjust your vertical alignment. So I'll remove those two screws. And the prism will just come out from the end. Now there's a single screw on the top of that prism mount there. Leave it alone. It was there to hold the prism into the mount, and then that was sealed with some lacquer. Do not disturb that. Getting that back again together correctly afterwards, if you disturb it, is a bother and a nuisance and entirely unnecessary. But occasionally I get cameras here, particularly if somebody sends me a jigsaw puzzle where they have cleverly gone through the entire camera and removed screws like that. Okay, so the arm. Now the arm here is on a bush, and the bush slides backwards and forwards in the housing. And because we want to get it back where it started from, I'm going to mark where the end of the arm comes on that rangefinder housing, so I can put it back exactly where it came from, or very close to it, rather than have to hunt for its correct position later. I'll just stretch the spring out and unhook the little pin, and I've got a special tool for this. You could use lots of things, and I have in the past. A stiff pair of tweezers might do the job for you. A pair of circlip pliers that have had the points ground down to a nice small point, they can unscrew that for you. And I've got another tool here. This spanner, which was made by Beljan in the US, there's two tiny points, and the position of one of them is adjustable, and that works really well when you can get it in. Of course, it's not an ideal shape for getting into small places. Sometimes you'd be better off with something on the end, but this works very well, and that loosened that up without any hassle at all. So I'll use a pair of tweezers to undo that screw. We've got our screw, a wavy washer, lift the arm out. That bush I mentioned should fall out with a bit of a tap. Here's the bush which ran in that slot there from the inside. It's fun putting it back. And this brass bush here, now that's almost certainly circular. It wasn't made to be an eccentric, but because of the split in it, it acts a little bit like an eccentric. So if you want everything to go back where it came from, I usually mark this. So that I can put it back where it came from, and then I'll hopefully will have less problem doing the adjustments. So we're back to the body here now. Right, so we've got a couple of plates here which hold all this in place. We only need to remove one side. That screws very tight. Now I want to get all these glass and components out. There's a spring clip in here on the middle component. Slide that out with the tip of my tweezers, and then the mask and the glass with these frame lines on it will come out. And of the front component, it's basically the same arrangement, or very similar. And to get that spring out, it's a stronger spring. It looks the same, it's a heavier spring. Now this construction here is locked in place with a touch of lacquer top and bottom. And that's to make sure it never shifts, because if it shifts, your rangefinder goes out of adjustment. So I've got to get some acetone, soften that lacquer, and then slide that out. Right, I'll put a drop of acetone on the top and a drop of acetone on the bottom. Repeat that. Let that soak in. Normally what I do is I just flick this little, there's a tab here on the frame, on the mask, and I normally just flick that with my fingernail and if the acetone's done its job, that'll come loose. Once it's loose, you can push the glass lens back out. But don't force anything. The glass that's in there, one of them is a thin piece of glass, much like this one. They're quite delicate, and of course they've got these silvered frame lines on them, so you don't want to break one. I can tell by the reaction there as I flick that metal mask that, you know, it's partly loose. Now that was it, that came loose. Okay, with that loose, I can probably slide out the glass at the rear there, so I'll just push on that very gently with the back of my tweezers. And there's the mask with the silver frames on it. And if I press down lightly on the lens from the front and slide this sandwich out, we've got the plastic mask on the outside, the main glass lens, which is plain on the front, concave on the inside, and there's that little metal mask that I was busy flicking the edge of, trying to get it loose. So those components now need to be cleaned with some acetone to get rid of the remains of that lacquer. And pay particular attention to the top and bottom edges of that glass, because that's certainly where they were glued in. You may have to do this a couple of times to get that lacquer off completely. That's good. Now the glass with the silvered lines on it, that silver is usually pretty robust. It'll stand up to being cleaned like this with acetone or glass cleaner and cotton buds. You may find that those lines are pretty much disappeared on your camera, and where that's the case, it's probably down to a long-term degradation, and probably, I would think, probably due to atmospheric conditions. It's only the glass on those front components that really you need to be doing this to, because the rest of it wasn't glued in with anything. Yeah, there's a bit of smearing on that. I'll do some more work on that. Okay, so what else have we got? Oh, we've got this little plastic piece at the front. That's got our parallax correction marks on it. Now that, I don't know what that is. It's not adversely affected by acetone. It might be celluloid. It's like a film base. That mask, I'll just give that a quick wipe because that's painted, and the acetone will strip the paint off if I leave it there for any length of time. Okay, so those components I now want to clean in the ultrasonic cleaner. So the pieces I'm interested in cleaning in the frame are the two pieces of glass with the silvered lines on them. Now the one with the larger rectangle goes into the slot here in the middle. The silvered line should face to the front. The silvering's on only one face of the glass, it's not on both faces of the glass. And if you work at it, you can spot which side that's on. The smaller rectangle goes in at the front, and the silvered line should face to the back, or face inwards. I'll put that little cover plate back on there, and the keeper screw here. And so those two pieces of glass with their silvered lines on them can get cleaned in the ultrasonic cleaner now, along with the semi-silvered mirror, which is visible here. Now the front surface of that is just plain glass. You could clean that with a cotton bud. The rear surface, that's surface silvered, and I can tell you start cleaning that, you'll clean all the silver right off it. So if you're cleaning things manually, just leave that inner surface there, the one that faces to the back, alone. Otherwise you won't like the result. The front surface of it, yes, you can clean that. You can clean all the other surfaces with glass cleaner and a cotton bud. Okay, that's just about ready for the ultrasonic clean. I'm just going to give the body a wipe here to remove any grease so that it's not contaminating the water I'm going to clean it in. And I'm going to clean this in a glass of hot water with normal domestic dish soap, and that'll be suspended in my ultrasonic cleaner. And typically about 3 minutes is all that's required to clean those surfaces. Once that's done, rinse this under a hot tap, blow out any moisture and dry it with a hairdryer, and you should have 3 sparkling pieces of glass in there. Well, I have this back from the ultrasonic cleaner. It's all nice and sparkly now, so I can start putting things back in there. Now I was careful when I put the glass pieces in there that the silvered lines were facing in the direction they should, so I can leave them in there and work around that now. Put that retainer clip in there. That holds the mask and the centre glass in place. And this front glass here, I've just cleaned that to make sure all the dust is off it. This little mask needs to go on there. It sort of clips around it. There's a speck of something sitting on there. Has it gone away? It has now. Right, that piece slides on in front of this glass. This piece of film with our parallax correction marks goes in here. Now this should be dull side to the front, and the 2 tick marks should be at the top. There's only 1 tick mark at the bottom. And then the stronger of the 2 springs slides in behind that pack, and that's the front components in place. I'll put that little bracket on there. And run the screw down. The rear lens, the eyepiece lens is here. I'll just clean that with a bit of glass cleaner and a soft cotton cloth. I'm sorry I'm not doing that on camera, I'm sort of running out of workspace here. Here's the lens. Now, convex side goes in, the plane side should be out. Here's the mask that goes over the back to hold it in place, and its fixing screw. I'll just peer out the window, see if that's clear and everything looks right. That looks good. Right, so this arm. First I want to clean that to make sure that any old grease and so forth is cleaned off it. Likewise this little brass bush. There's my all-purpose block of wood, there it is. Now that brass bush, I made a little mark on it so I could put it back where it came from. I'm taking some molybdenum paste, once round the inside, lightly on that face, and I can tell you there's virtually nothing there. I'll put this bush back in place, position it so that the alignment marks are where I'd made them. And I want to clean the glass in there. That little lens needs to be clean, so I choose a cotton bud, put a drop of glass cleaner on it, clean both surfaces. Check to make sure I got a good result. That looks fine. Next, what do we want? Oh, we've got to put this together, so we want this for a start. That's that little bush that goes inside the finder. That's got to go on the inside of this piece here, so I find it handy to have this curved tweezers to hold it. Slide it into position, and I've got a little jig. It'll support that, so if I pop that over the top, that'll support that bush from underneath, which means that I can then fit the screw without it being a major fight. So the arm can go on. That wavy washer, I'm just going to give that a wipe with molybdenum paste. Fit that over there. Put the screw in place. Take a pair of tweezers. Run the screw in. Make sure that the bush is pushed aligned correctly so that the end of this arm lines up with that mark I'd made earlier before I took it apart. That looks pretty good. Do that up, and because I'm full of confidence, I'll use my spanner to tighten that right up. Got to fit the return spring back, and that's held in place with this pin. So the pin goes through the end of the spring, and then stretch the spring out, and that drops in there. That pin drops in there. Check that the arm moves freely. That all looks good. Brings us to the prism. The prism, we've got 3 faces on the prism that we can clean, or that we need to clean. 2 on the outside, front and rear. Now there's no silvering on this prism, it relies on what do they call that, total internal reflection. And the inside surface you can get to by poking your cotton bud down inside the hole there and swirling it about. That's a bit more of a nuisance because getting that surface dried and clean and smear free is a bit trickier. That went okay. Just blow that out to make sure there's no cotton fibres down there. Put the prism back in on the end of the finder and fit the screws. Your start position here should be with the prism nice and square to the front of the finder. And the final adjustment for this will happen in the camera body because the arm can be or will be influenced by the camera body, and that will shift it. Right, so there I've got my rangefinder back together. I'm just going to peer out the window and see what the alignment's like. Yeah, you can't do that very often. It's fallen back exactly where it should be, so everything is just spot on. The images come together at infinity and they're vertically aligned. Now that's unexpected. Doesn't make for much of a demonstration. We can talk about that. Now I'm just going to put a drop of lacquer here where I removed it with the acetone so that the so that the lenses can't shift. And that is our rangefinder, serviced and ready to go back in the camera body. And because of the magic of the internet, I've got the other one here that I've already done. So they're ready to go in their respective camera bodies. And so we'll make that the next task. Now the rangefinders, putting them back will be exactly the same process for both cameras, so I'm only going to bother to show you one. The arm on the rangefinder is pulled forward by this stud here. So when you put your rangefinder back, you put it back with the focus set to infinity. If you have this racked out to the front, that screw will be to the front. When you put the rangefinder on there, the screw will be in front of the arm, and when you push it back like that, it will bend the arm. So don't do it. Set this to infinity before you put the rangefinder back in place. You want our rangefinder and its mounting screws. I also want a drop of lacquer to stop this thing from being able to wander across the top of the camera if the camera gets a thump. So what I'll do is take some lacquer and put a drop in 4 spots on the base of that rangefinder, and when it's screwed down and the lacquer's all cured, it won't be wanting to move around. Right, so put the rangefinder on, pull it to the back. There are 2 screws. You have to drop them in from above, and if you do it right, they fall straight into the slot. Like that. If you don't, you just swear and curse and turn the camera upside down and recover them again. And do it again. Oh, having said that, don't turn the camera upside down with your shutter release shaft flapping in the breeze, because it'll fall out and cause you grief. Right, so I'm just checking that rangefinder arm moves nicely with the focus, making sure my rangefinder's pulled back hard against its stop at the back there. It's nice and square, and I'll tighten those 2 screws up. Now I'll look out the window and see what it looks like. I'm looking for my vertical alignment, and I can see that my moving image is slightly low. That means I need to tighten the front screw on this prism very slightly. Now my moving image is slightly high, so I've overdone that. It's getting pretty close. Don't be surprised that it takes you a long time and a lot of toing and froing to get your adjustments right. It's a fiddly job. I can see that the rangefinder moves slightly past the infinity position. I'm just going to tighten that screw up slightly, which basically stops the rangefinder from returning back so far. That's pretty good. See if it'll move a bit more for me. The screw's unusually tight. That's fine. Now I've got to decide about my infinity adjustment. When you're viewing a target at infinity, as you turn the focus scale ring just at the point at which the focus scale ring stops at the infinity stop, your images should coincide. And mine coincide there. How much movement have I got? About half the width of that letter N in terms of movement. So that tells me that the arm is being dropped back slightly too far. And so I need to make an adjustment here. That's the lock screw. This is my adjustment screw. I need to pull that arm in slightly. I'll try that. Now these adjustments are extremely subtle, and it's easy to overdo it. I'm quite happy with that. I'm just going to check my vertical alignment again. That appears to be good. So I'll just check that adjustment is locked. And check that it hasn't moved when I've tightened that lock screw. And that rangefinder's good. I've got good alignment there. I'll check the close focus too to make sure that the rangefinder works correctly at a closer focus distance. That starts getting messy. I'll back when I've checked that. No, that's good too. So the rangefinder there is all correctly adjusted. It's working well. It's nice and clean. That part of the job is done.